Hey y'all. So Matthew chapter 16, part 1. This is my now fifth or sixth attempt to record this, but here we go. Chapter context. Matthew 16 finds Jesus returned from the Gentile regions only to be immediately confronted by another group of Jewish religious leaders. Yet again, these men prove they are insincere. No amount of evidence will ever be enough for them. After a dramatic discussion about Jesus' role as Messiah, Jesus indicates that those who would come after him must take up their crosses and follow him. His references to some seeing the Son of Man coming in his kingdom will be fulfilled at the beginning of chapter 17 in the event known as the Transfiguration. Let's get into this breakdown yet again. So Matthew 16 begins with another confrontation between Jesus and some of Israel's religious leaders. A group of Pharisees and Sadducees approach Jesus together. This is unusual since the two sects don't agree on more than the most basic points of theology. Their demand to Jesus for another sign from heaven, Matthew 12:13-14, and then 22. Jesus points out that they can read basic signs in the skies to predict weather. However, they refuse to recognize obvious signs such as many miracles he has already accomplished. He declares he will not give them any sign but that of Jonah 1:17, who was swallowed by the great fish and restored on the third day, Matthew 16:1-4. Jesus and the disciples get into the boat again to cross the Sea of Galilee, perhaps to gain space away from Jewish religious leaders. The disciples realize that they have forgotten to bring bread for this trip. Jesus, apparently still thinking about his exchange with the Pharisees and Sadducees, warns the disciples to watch out for the leaven of those religious leaders. Leaven or yeast was often used as a metaphor for sin, something tiny which could thoroughly infiltrate and change whatever it entered. The disciples wonder if Jesus is upset because they forgot the bread, Matthew 16:5-7. Instead, Jesus becomes upset about their small faith and focus on earthly bread. He reminds them that they were present twice when he fed thousands of people from just a few loaves, Matthew 14:13-21, 15, and then verses 34-38. There's no reason they should be so worried about food as to miss such an obvious metaphor. He warns them again about the false teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees, Matthew 16:8-12. Jesus and the disciples traveled north about 25 miles from the Sea of Galilee to Caesarea. I don't know, it's spelled like Caesar, but then add the E at the end. Philippi. There Jesus asked them who people say he is. By this he means the general opinion of the public. The disciples report to some people think he is the return of a great prophet, others that he is somehow John the Baptist. Making an important contrast between popular opinion and personal belief, Jesus asks who the disciples say he is. Peter answers for the group, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Matthew 16:13-16. This results in the enthusiastic response with Jesus saying, "God the Father has revealed the truth to Peter." Jesus then makes a wordplay out of Peter's name using two different Greek words. One referring to Peter means a stone or a rock. The other referring to the substance on which the church will be built refers to rock as a substance or a material. On Peter's statement, the belief he expressed, Jesus says he will build his earthly church, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Jesus tells Peter he will be given the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever the disciples bind or loose on earth will be bound or loosed in heaven, Matthew 16:17-19. Surprisingly, Jesus then tells a group of men not to tell others as his role as Messiah just yet. Jesus is aware that people are hungry for a victorious earthly Messiah. They are likely to revolt against Rome based on how they responded to Jesus in the past, John 16:15. For that reason, widespread proclamation of his role needs to wait, Matthew 16:20. Jesus, who has limited his travels in ministry mostly to the region of Galilee and northern Israel, begins to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. This is literally the headquarters, the home territory of the enemies who hate him the most. He predicts he will suffer many things from those elders, chief priests, and scribes. Ultimately, he will even be killed Of course, Jesus also mentions that he will be raised on the third day. There we go. Matthew 16:21. Peter seems to have gained too much confidence from Jesus' recent praise. He does not merely disagree with Jesus, he rebukes him. Peter is scolding the same man he recently identified as Messiah because Jesus is not meeting Peter's expectations. In what must have been a devastating reply to Peter, Jesus shockingly refers to Peter as Satan. Peter's mind is set on human things, including human preferences and human traditions, not the things of God. Matthew 16:22-23. Jesus repeats an earlier message to those gathered nearby, and who would come after him must take up their cross of self-denial and follow him. Crucifixion in that era evoked concepts like humiliation, dishonor, shame, agony, misery, and death. Christ is not speaking about tolerating minor inconveniences. He's speaking of willingness to sacrifice everything associated with the world. Those who live for themselves, clinging to worldly things and earthly ideas, will lose their eternal lives. Those who lose their earthly lives will find true eternal life. Jesus frames this as a common sense rhetorical question. What good would it be to gain all the temporary things of the world only to suffer an eternity of loss? Judgment will come for all people and those who reject Christ will be lost. Matthew 16:24-27. The final comment made by Jesus in this chapter is a reference to some of these disciples seeing him coming into his kingdom before they die. Matthew 16:28. This is a reference to the transfiguration, the very next thing described by Matthew 17:1-2. In that event, Peter, James, and John will witness a glorified scene which foreshadows Jesus' rule on earth. Alright, y'all, that's all I have for Matthew chapter 6, the breakdown part 1, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.